Hi everyone, Jason here from Spiritualbabies.net. You've joined us again for this week's Haftarah Half-Hour. And joining us again, as always, is our friend Rabbi Joshua Neely. Welcome back, Rabbi Neely.
Good to be back, and please don't hate me for being in sunny Orlando.
It's been very chilly this week. I think we've struggled to go over freezing point this week. But I have friends in Canada who is like, freezing point? I'd kill for freezing point. It's like minus 35 here. So, no, to be honest, I quite like the winter. So we are in the Haftarah portion for Beshalach, which I'm sure is the wrong pronunciation.
Beshalach is perfect.
Oh, brilliant. That's the first one done then, because there's a few of those in this portion. And we're going to start off with Devorah. She's one of the most famous prophetesses. Can you give us a little bit of background on Devorah?
So Devorah is a prophetess. She's a shoftah. She's what is usually translated as a judge during the chieftain period of the Israelite time in the land. So this is the period that came after Joshua and before the establishment of the monarchy. And during this time, you had different chieftains who rose to lead the people, both in peace as well as in times of trouble. Although the times of trouble are the ones that get the most record. And Devorah is, of course, famous because she is the only woman that is recorded during this time period as being a shoftah, as being a leader of the people. And that creates a lot of questions. You know, in ancient Israelite society, although women were certainly respected, and although women were considered to be equal members of the covenant, were still considered to be obligated to hold the commandments, they did not have a lot of formal power positions within the community. They didn't usually sit with the council of elders. They didn't normally lead people in battle. They didn't normally make the major economic decisions, or at least not publicly. And so Devorah is a little bit of a surprise. And the surprisingness of her and women in this story is one of the major motifs, because she's not the only important woman who shows up.
The other, in Torah we hear there's a family of females, aren't there, that go to Moses and say, our husbands have died, we've got no relatives, can we get our inheritance? That's the only other time that springs to mind where you have females who are kind of the beginning of that line. I always look at the Hebrew families as tents, and you had the father of the tent, the patriarch, and everyone else kind of scatters under them like in a tree.
Right.
But yeah, in this instance, and with the daughters of
Zlofachad.
Thank you very much. There was no way I was going to get that out.
That's okay. It's not an easy one. And you know, in that case, it's a good example to fill in a little bit more about why women had this unequal status. And really, as you pointed out, it was because inheritance, in particular of land, which was the primary force of or primary form of wealth at the time, and primary form of sustenance, was passed down by the father because of tribal affiliation, so that no one tribe would permanently take the land from another tribe. And so you needed to have the children, the sons of, you know, Issachar, or the sons of Judah, or the sons of Dan, inherit from their fathers the land along with the tribal identification to make sure that the tribal land stayed within the tribe. And since almost all of the wealth was centered along the land, that meant that women were quite close to being disenfranchised from the real flow of self-sustenance, and that made them very dependent. Things that both Torah as well as Rabbinic Judaism tried to remedy that societal structure through the commandments and through legislation for the community. The most famous, of course, being the ketubah during the marriage ceremony. But that's also why Devorah, why Deborah stands out, because she is not fitting what would have been the typical model of a woman in her day.
So we are reading from Judges 4:4 through 5:31, and you want to get your running shoes on for this one if you're reading this. It's a long Haftarah portion. So Devorah, wife of Lapidot, was a prophetess. She led Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm of Devorah near Ramah and Bethel, in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites would come to her for decisions. All right, so I've noticed this before. I don't know if it's reflected in Jewish tradition and history, but there seems to be a pattern of prophets sitting under trees in ancient Israel. I found it really interesting that when we find the parts where Abraham is sitting by his tent waiting for some sort of divine instruction, there always seems to be some tall trees nearby. Is there a thing? Is there like a connection in if you say no, this is a whole big waste. Is there like a connection between prophets and these huge trees?
Literal or required? No. But in terms of functional as well as figuratively, yes. So first of all, the big trees were often very famous landmarks. You didn't have GPS. You didn't have the road signs to tell you where to go. You didn't necessarily even have roads. But trees on hills, that especially ones that stood out as a small copse by themselves or a singular tree, were very easy markers of that's where you need to go. And so the trees were important for that. And figuratively, of course, and functionally as well, the trees were also important because they were convenient places for people to meet comfortably. If you sit under the boughs of a tree, it's a lot nicer than just sitting on a barren hill. So there are many stories as well of the rabbis meeting with their students under trees and holding their lessons there. Figuratively, of course, the tree is considered in Judaism to be Eitz Chaim Chi. It's the Eitz Chaim Chi. It's the symbol of the Torah as the tree of life. It is the tree of life to those who hold fast to it. So the tree as a figurative allusion to Torah itself is a very common theme.
All right, good. All that stuff on the tree, brilliant. Okay.
But before we get into the Barak, I just wanted to add a little bit more here. So we have this interesting title that she is the wife of Lapidot, right? Eshet Lapidot. And the question is, we never hear about him again. He pops up here, and then we never hear from him again. So there are a couple of different interpretations by the tradition. One is to say that the Lapidot, which can mean sort of torches, is referring to the idea that Devorah was chosen by God to be a leader because she had dedicated herself to maintaining the wicks for the lights of the Mishkan, for the tabernacle. And as she was dedicated to making sure there was lights for other and making sure that God's light was in this world, she proved herself as having the right direction, the right focus to be a leader for the people. An alternative explanation, though, is that Lapidot, which, like I said, means kind of a torch light, is very similar in theme to Barak, which can mean lightning. So, well, really more. We'll go with that for the moment. It's easier. So the idea is maybe Lapidot was another name for Barak, and she might have actually been Barak's wife. If you read that in that way, it makes the discussion or argument between her and Barak much more acute as they are wrestling with that. Hold on a second.
She summoned Barak, son of Abinoam, of Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded you, go march on Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and I will draw Sisera, Yavin's army commander, with his chariots and his troops towards you up the Wadi Kishon, and I will deliver him into your hands." But Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I will go. If not, I will not go." "Very well, I will go with you," she answered. "However, there will be no glory for you in the course you are taking. For then the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." So Devorah went back with Barak to Kadesh. Barak then mustered Zebulun and Naphtali at Kadesh, 10,000 men marched up after him, and Devorah also went up with him. So she has some sort of plan here, and he's basically going, I'll only go if you go. And she's like, well, you know that's going to look bad for you if you have to take, especially I guess if it was the wife. I mean, there's a couple of things there. I mean, if I personally wouldn't want my wife going into a kind of what would be a combat situation. And for someone that's supposed to be leading the troops, surely holding your wife's hand while you're doing it is going to look slightly emasculated.
So that's definitely one issue. The other issue, though, is you look at it from other viewpoints, is for most of the period of the judges, and certainly in Joshua, and even back to Moses, the main prophet of the time, the main leader of the people at the time, was present at all the battles. Right? So the idea that the people would want to see, just like Moses, just like Joshua, just like the other judges, this prophet of God there with them at the battle is not totally unreasonable. On the other hand, she has just given him a commandment, transferred from God or transmitted from God. So who is he to put another condition onto it? Just because that's the way it was done in the past, just because Moses stood there with his hands up during the fight, and that, was what inspired the people, doesn't mean that's the way it's always going to be. And it is perhaps that because of that, because he is unwilling to see that she says what she says, that he is not going to see the honor, the glory of this victory. And that may not just be a man-woman issue. That may also be just a prophet-layman issue. That the prophet is saying, look, God has handed this opportunity to you, not to me. You can take it. You don't need the prophet to be there with you. And we can even set aside the male-female issue of this and say it was just a question of prophet versus layman, and he still made the wrong call.
Now, Hava, I want to say it's Hava, the Kenite had separated from the other Kenites, descendants of Hovav. Gonna get the hang of this. Father-in-law of Moses. Now, that's interesting because we've got a different name there, right?
Yes. Jethro, gets quite a few different names. He gets at least two within the Torah itself. He gets another one here. The issue is really explained as he has different titles. That he has his personal name, but then he was a very high, important person within the Midianites, and so he would have had titles as well. So it shouldn't surprise us too much that he gets called by different things.
Okay. Descendants of Hovav, father-in-law of Moses. And I had pitched his tent at, I'm going to warm up for this, Elon Bitzah Ananim.
Perfect.
Oh man, it's so tricky.
I got to tell you, the Hebrew's easier. It's much easier to know how to pronounce that when you look in the Hebrew.
If I had endless resources, I'd totally take classes. Which is near Kadesh. So we've got this person who's separated from the other ones, and they're related. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? That the father-in-law of Moses, that was a long time ago. It's interesting that there's still this connection to. For them, it must have felt like a different era, but they still remember this group of people.
Well, remember, much of the tribal relationships around this part were governed by the children of Abraham and Esau, and so it's not that surprising that we would also keep track of the other descendants from the connection within Midian to Moses' family. Why in the world are we all of a sudden talking about this group? Well, this one guy and his family, but this is what might be called foreshadowing. You need to know that he's there in order to know, or in order to understand what happens later.
Sisera was informed that Barak, son of Avinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, so Sisera ordered all his chariots, 900 iron chariots, and all the troops he had to move up from Hareshet Goyim to the Wadi Kishon. Then Devorah said to Barak, "Up! This is the day on which the Lord will deliver Sisera into your hands. The Lord is marching before you." Barak charged down Mountain Tabor, followed by 10,000 men. And the Lord threw Sisera and all his chariots and army into a panic before the onslaught of Barak. Sisera leapt from his chariot and fled on foot. Not a great example of a leader. As Barak pursued the chariots and the soldiers as far as Hareshet Goyim, all of Sisera's soldiers fell by the sword. Not a man was left. So there was. They make a point of saying iron chariots because I guess iron was like the Scud missile of the day, wasn't it? It's very difficult to go up against iron if you don't have iron.
Well, this was the transitional point between Bronze Age and Iron Age, and iron chariots were, like you say, Scud missile or main battle tank, whatever you want to describe it. These are terrifying weapons that they didn't even have to hit you with a sword; they could just run you down. And there was very little chance of you being able to hurt them. So 900 iron chariots against 10,000 infantry. The infantry aren't looking good for those odds.
And God forces dismay, I imagine, topples those chariots over and gets the riders out. Then suddenly you've got 900 people against 10,000 men. That's a very different equation.
Well, there's a couple different explanations. If you look online, you'll see some good illustrations of this area of Mount Tabor and the Wadi Kishon. And quite likely what's happening here is the chariots are coming running across a plain and they get caught into the river valley, the river bed and the mud. And now all of a sudden your iron chariots are not mobile, they're not doing what they need to do. And as the other infantry of the Canaanites begins to attack up the hill, the Israelites come down the hill with their momentum and just plow into them. And once panic sets in, that was usually the breaking point of most ancient battles. If you lost your organization and cohesion, you were not going to get people back together again. Even if they were of superior numbers or of military equipment, once they panic, it's over.
And we've got the lead here. He just legs it. That's what we say in Ireland. He legged it. He just ran away.
Well, yeah. I mean, if if everything was going the wrong direction for you, why would you stick around to die? That wasn't the kind of people the Canaanites were.
Sisera, meanwhile, had fled on foot to the tent of Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was friendship between King Javin of Hazor and the family of Heber the Kenite. Yael came out to greet Sisera and said to him, "Come in, my lord, come in here, do not be afraid." So he entered her tent. She covered him with a blanket. Does that mean hiding him?
Exactly. I mean, it's she is giving him sanctuary. Because he trusts her, of course, because there is currently peace between Heber and the Canaanites.
He said to her, "Please let me have some water, I am thirsty." She opened a skin of milk and gave him some to drink. And she covered him again. He said to her, "Stand at the entrance of the tent. If anyone comes and asks you if there is anybody here, say no." Then Yael, wife of Heber, took a tent pin and grasped the mallet. When he was fast asleep from exhaustion, she approached him stealthily and drove the pin through his temple until it went down into the ground. Spoiler alert, thus he died. I think that's the most gruesome execution I can remember from the Tanakh. In it's so direct. I mean, she didn't suffocate him, poison him, strangle him, run him through with a sword. She waited till he was asleep, and then she drove a tent peg through his head with a mallet. That's like You
She
wouldn't
really
find a
makes.
guy. You wouldn't find a guy doing that to another guy.
Well, I would say history actually disagrees with you on that. But the part that is meant to make us pause is that she offered hospitality, that she invited him into the tent, that she fed him, that she covered him, that she treated him like a mother. The idea of bedding him down and of giving him milk. I mean, this is really very reminiscent of motherhood in many literary themes, which would be the typical role of a woman for the average reader to be thinking. So when she turns around and grabs the tools of the house, because they live in tents, and uses it to strike him down, it is completely shattering. I'm not so much put off by the gruesomeness of his execution as the way the text was written to lull us, just like Sisera, into a false sense of security. You know, that, oh, he's going to get away, he's safe, she's taking care of him, wham! All of a sudden, it's just, he's dead, and she's standing over him with hammer and spike. And it's, okay, I didn't know women could do that kind of thing. But that was entirely the point, is we began with Deborah, who was doing something that many readers probably would have wondered, I didn't know women could do that. And we end the story with Yael doing something that many of the readers probably also thought, I didn't know women could do that either. So it makes a remarkable set of bookends.
Is there a traditional thought on why that happened? Is it, because I can read it that so this guy turns up, she knows him, she's like, oh, he's in trouble, I'll hide, and then at some point she thought, actually, it's probably not a great idea to have him here. Maybe I can side with the winning team by taking him out, and then if they turn up, I'm a hero, rather than it kind of going the other way.
No, most of the commentators say that this was her intention from the beginning. That although there may have been peace between Hever and Yavin, that didn't necessarily mean they were liking each other. It just meant they weren't fighting each other. So there's a question here of her breaking that peace. There's a question of her breaking hospitality, but she seemed to know what was right and did what was right rather than what was diplomatic.
It makes the food and the comfort all the more chilling then that she was like, oh, I'll get him sleepy.
Yep. Well, and commentators point out that he asks for water and she gives him milk, which is, as many people know, a very nice way to help you relax and go to sleep if you've had a busy day. Like losing a major battle.
Now Barak appeared in pursuit of Sisera. Yael went out to greet him and said, come, I will show you the man you were looking for. He went inside with her, and there was Sisera. And there Sisera was lying dead, with the pin in his temple. On that day God subdued King Yavin of Hazor before the Israelites. The hand of the Israelites bore harder and harder on King Yavin of Canaan, until they destroyed King Yavin of Canaan. And I have a little note here that the Sephardim Haftarah starts at this point with the song.
Correct. With chapter 5, right. That might be also a good place to point out that the ancient Canaanite world was really a bunch of city-states. We may talk of Canaan as though it was one country, but Hatzor would have been its own entity, much like Athens or Sparta or Thebes in Greece. Hatzor would have been its own city-state entity with its fortifications for its town, with the surrounding farms and small villages being connected to it. So just because much of the rest of the country had been subdued by the Israelites, Hatzor had been a thorn that had stood out, probably due to good fortifications, and now it begins to fall.
Okay, chapter 5. On that day, Devorah and Barak, son of Avinoam, sang. When locks go untrimmed in Israel, when people dedicate themselves, bless the Lord. So, locks, hair? I'm assuming it's hair.
Yes. Exactly. So really, what it seems to be here is an allusion to the Nazarite vow.
3. Hear, O kings, give ear, O potentates. I will sing to the Lord, will hymn the Lord of Israel. O Lord, when you came forth from Seir, advanced from the country of Edom, the earth trembled, the heavens dripped, yea, the clouds dripped water, the mountains quaked. Before the Lord, him of Sinai, before the Lord God of Israel.
So these phrases are generally considered by the tradition, and Rashi describes it in most detail, as being a reference back to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, as a way of sort of anchoring these events. One of the things that troubled some of the commentators was that Devorah says at the beginning of chapter 4, the Lord God has said, you will go out and fight the Sisera, blah, 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 blah. We have no quote within the Tanakh itself of God saying that to Deborah. It's not as though when God spoke to Deborah saying, and then Deborah spoke to Barak repeating. It's just Deborah says. Now, that is explained by some of the commentators by saying, well, yes, because Deborah was referring back to the overall statement of subduing the land of Canaan, which was given in the Torah, that it didn't need to be stated as a separate charge. We'd already been given that commandment, and she was merely calling for the fulfillment in a specific instance against Sisera and Yavin. And so we need to hear in the poem that they were anchoring their deeds not in just land grabs, not in just power, not in just fighting, but they were anchoring what they were doing in Torah. And so it's fitting that it begins with that that reference.
Is it the case that most of the prophets in the Tanakh were accredited for authoring their own books?
On the whole, yes.
So that would kind of make sense that they would say what was said to them and then they would write down their responses, but Devorah didn't have a hand in writing this down, so perhaps that's why it's not listed?
That's another good explanation, yes. Sometimes, the message was more important than the original vision that made it clear to the prophet. And so the original vision might have just been left out.
In the days of Shamgar, son of Anat, in the days of Yael, caravans ceased, the wayfarers went by roundabout paths. Deliverance ceased in Israel. Till you rose, O Devorah, arose, O mother in Israel. When they chose new gods, was there a fighter in the gates? No shield or spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. When they chose new gods, are we talking about Israel?
Yes, absolutely. So the overall pattern of the book of Judges is the people betray the covenant with God, and as they do, the Canaanites gain supremacy over them, or later the Philistines, and then there arises a hero, a prophet, a judge, which leads us back over our enemies and towards Torah, and then everything gets better, and then we turn away from God again, and then it all comes crashing down again. So that cycle comes over and over again throughout this. So it's talking about the fact that things have fallen apart, and that's because we have betrayed God, and that's why Devorah was so needed.
My heart is with Israel's leaders, with the dedicated of the people, bless the Lord. You riders on tawny she-asses, you who sit on saddle rugs, and you wayfarers declare it. Louder than the sound of arches, there among the watering places, let them chant the gracious acts of the Lord, his gracious deliverance of Israel. Then did the people of the Lord march down to the gates. Awake, awake, O Devorah, awake, awake, strike up the chant. Arise, O Barak, take your captives, O son of Avinoam.
I'd just point out that what they're saying is that things were terrible and you couldn't even travel the road safely. So now everyone who stops at an inn or is traveling should raise a glass and be thankful to God for sending Devorah and Barak and for making everything safe again. It's, if you're enjoying the peace that you have, give thanks to the people who came and gave it.
Then was the remnant made victor over the mighty. The Lord's people won my victory over the warriors. From Ephraim came they whose roots were in Amalek. After you, your kin Benjamin. From Machir came down leaders. From Zebulun, such as hold the marshal's staff, and Issachar's chiefs were with Devorah. As Barak, so was Issachar, rushing after him into the valley. It's really great to see some of the. I mean, you read a lot of these great stories in the Tanakh, and some of the tribes don't really get much of a mention after you've gone through the blessings, and once you come out of the Torah, it's really great to see Issachar and Benjamin mentioned, Zebulun mentioned in these bigger narratives.
It is. What's also noticed, however, is that not everyone was there, and we're going to be saying more about that a little bit later on.
Among the clans of Reuben were great decisions of heart. Why then did you stay among the sheepfolds and listen as they piped for their flocks? Among the clans of Reuben were great searchings of heart. So they're kind of, should we, shouldn't we, should we, shouldn't we? No, we shouldn't.
And they were late for the battle, as you could say.
Gilead tarried beyond the Jordan, and Dan, why did he linger by the ships? Asher remained at the seacoast and tarried at his landing. Zebulun is a people that mocked at death. Naphtali on the open heights. Dan, there is a great tradition, isn't there, of Dan being kind of a seafaring people?
Yes, exactly. That's why the symbol that's usually picked for them is ships.
And the line there that starts off 18, Zebulun is a people that mocked at death. Is that like I laugh in the face of death? Is that what that means?
Yes, because Zebulun was praised earlier on for having come to the fight. So here they're being used as a contrast. All these others who didn't come, all those who were late to the fight or didn't show up at all, are being contrasted with Zebulun, who was willing to come and fight.
Right. Then the kings came, they fought. The kings of Canaan fought. At Ta'anach by Megiddo's waters, they got no spoil of silver. The stars fought from heaven. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The torrent Kishon swept them away, the raging torrent, the torrent Kishon. So that's a little nod there, isn't it, to the idea of this wadi causing the damage to the chariots.
Exactly right. One of the things that we see here, which is very parallel to the Song of the Sea, Shirat Hayam, which we get in the Torah portion of this week, is that the poetic version and the prose version, the narrative version, complement each other. But you're also going to see details in one but not in the other, simply because of the style of telling the story. And you'll also see, as we just saw here, even some poetic references that are meant to enhance the story, but are not necessarily meant to be literally true. So it says, the stars fought from the heavens, from their courses they fought against Sisera. That doesn't necessarily mean literally that there were stars shooting down star beams that were striking soldiers. It doesn't mean that there were necessarily meteorites coming down hitting people. It means that it was as though the heavens themselves in all of their entirety were arrayed against them. The forces of heaven and earth moved against Sisera's forces. It still just can be a muddy river, and the poetry can call it heaven and earth moving against them.
So 21 finishes, march on, my soul, with courage. Then the horses' hooves pounded as headlong galloped the steeds. Curse Meroz. So who's Meroz, or what is Meroz?
Meroz here is considered to be one of the other cities that did not send support to help Israelites against Yavin.
Curse Meroz, said the angel of the Lord, bitterly curse its inhabitants, because they came not to the aid of the Lord, among the warriors. Most blessed of women.
Hold on, just a second. I'm gonna interrupt there because that's a rather strange sentence. Does God need help? Right? They didn't come to help God, but since when does God need help? But the Mechilta, one of our early Midrash collections, points out that if you fail to help another person who is in need, then it is the same as though you were betraying God. And vice versa. If you help another person in need, then it is as though you are helping God directly. It's not that God needs help or he's going to somehow fail without help. It's we need to see our actions and our help other people as being a service to God, not just a kindness to another person.
Most blessed of women, Biyael, wife of Hevir the Kenite, most blessed of women in tents. He asked for water, she offered milk. In a princely bowl she brought him plants. Her left hand reached for the tent peg, her right for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera, crushed his head, smashed and pierced his temple. At her feet he sank, lay outstretched. At her feet he sank and lay still. Where he sank, there he laid, destroyed. That's very theatrical, isn't it?
It's beautiful poetry, and the Hebrew is even more almost alliterative with the way the verbs work. It's very powerful.
So this is something different than we read in the narrative.
Yes.
Through the window peered Sisera's mother. Behind the lattice she whined. Why is his chariot so long in coming? I'd say that without the terrible accent. Why is the chariot so long in coming? Why so late the clatter of his wheels?
I'm going to force you to pause there, because it's an amazing thing and often missed that we now have the third powerful woman for the story. Right, we had Deborah to start, we had Yael to finish Sisera, but now we are seeing all things Sisera's mother, which is very almost painfully provocative. We have this woman, she's behind the lattice, she's in the proper woman position, at home, demure, waiting for her son to come home, the conquering hero general. And she's looking out through the lattice where she's imprisoned in a sense, and she's wondering, why is he so late in coming? I mean, it's very painful to imagine. But before you get too sympathetic to her, wait until you see what she expects is happening.
The wisest of her ladies give answer. She too replies to herself. That means that she is it's not the woman that answers here, not the servant that answers here. It's the mother that answers.
Well, it's both. They are chattering and discussing what must be delaying them. They are comforting themselves of his lateness by saying, "Oh, I know what it must be," and they're just sort of chatting about it.
They must be dividing the spoil they have found, a damsel or two for each man. Spoil of dyed cloth for Sisera, spoil of embroidered cloths, a couple of embroidered cloths around every neck as spoil.
I know why he hasn't come home. He's raping and pillaging. That takes a long time. So yeah, I understand why he's delayed. The Hebrew is even crasser, if you'll pardon that expression. The word for damsel is so quaint in English. We think damsel in distress and all of that, but that's not the word that the text uses for Sisera's mother. It actually says racham, which comes from the Hebrew word for womb. It's not the word for a woman or a maid. It's the word for a part of a woman. And as we know, in most modern English dialects, describing a woman by a body part is usually meant quite derogatory. So Sisera's mother is basically saying, yeah, he's out, raping, and that's perfectly fine with me, because he's such a good boy. And it really gives us a glimpse into the world and the worldview of the Canaanites that the Israelites were fighting against. And it makes it much more understandable why there was such a problem between these two people.
Yeah, that's just nasty. I didn't know that.
No, yeah, they cleaned it up in English, because if you were to try and find an English equivalent word that had the same notion of violence and an objectification of women, the publisher probably wouldn't publish it.
No, we certainly couldn't talk about it on this show.
No.
So it finishes. So may all your enemies perish, O Lord, but may his friends be as the sun rising in might. And the land was tranquil for 40 years. That's a nice end after the unpleasantness of before.
Well, it also is good as well that the poem finishes with the reminder that although there are enemies, there are also friends. And that we need to look to both. One of the things that was very striking about this is although the victory was precipitated by Devorah and was carried by the soldiers on the field, the final victory came at the hands of someone who wasn't even Jewish, of someone who wasn't directly part of the covenant. And it really ties things together very nicely when Yael has that very important role, because it really says, look, we have these enemies, but there are also friends in our fight against these types of enemies. And we need to make sure that we curse the one and we praise the other.
So there we are, everyone. That was this week's Haftarah Half Hour. It's a corker. You're probably looking at your clocks and thinking this is not a half an hour. It's not. Sue me. So thank you, Rabbi Neely, for joining us again this week.
Always my pleasure.
And we'll see you and everybody else next week. Stick around to the end of the show and you will see the Haftarah for next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.